You are listening to the Weekly Dartscast. 1 hour 90.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Weekly Dartscast, the official podcast of the Love the Darts magazine. I'm Alex Moss, and once again I'm joined by my co-host Burton DeWitt. Burton, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing well too, and firstly we've got to apologise to you guys. We didn't have an episode last week, just, me and you were both quite busy. Burton, what were you up to last week?
Nothing major, just moving, avoiding a hurricane, flying overseas to complete my move, and going to a darts tournament in Germany. Nothing major. What about you?
Not as exciting really, but I've just started up a college course for a year, so that's kept me a bit occupied, and I was kindly invited to the Target product launch on Tuesday, which was a quality day, as I'm sure a few people have seen on social media. A great day. But we're back after our little break last week. Plenty of darts to talk about, and I suppose we couldn't really go without mentioning it from the previous weekend. Mensur Suljovic winning the Champions League of Darts in Cardiff the weekend before last. What do you think his win means for darts?
It shows the growth of the game, and yes, you could talk about how he was, for the most part, outplayed, although he hit all the right shots in the final. But if we look at the rest of the weekend, he was the best player. He averaged between 97 and 101 in all of his matches. He consistently was throwing in 15 dart legs almost every leg with the darts. And over a course of 4 matches, you're going to win 4 matches if you do that. He beat Gary Anderson, he beat Peter Wright, he beat Dave Chisnell, and then he beat Raymond van Barneveld, a player he usually struggles against. And he's established himself now as one of the top players in the game. He seems to be a guarantee, according to pretty much everyone, to make Champions League now with this title. I mean, you look at people who've won Premier TV titles. Only Paul Nicholson in recent memory, and of course Scott Waits, who wasn't eligible, did not get selected for Premier League. He's established himself as a Premier League player now. And okay, he could still play his way out of it over the next few months. If he struggles at the back end of the year, he could lose that spot. But it's his to lose right now. And there doesn't seem to be any indication that it's going to stop.
Absolutely. I think it's going to take a disastrous dip in results over the next few months for Mensur to miss out on the Premier League, and I think the only way he does miss out now is if, like last year, he decides he doesn't want to play in it. And I think the way the weekend went in Cardiff, I think it's probably proved a lot more to himself more than anyone that he can compete with the top players in the world. This tournament, the top 8 players, there was no easy games throughout the whole weekend, and we saw in his interviews that maybe it was a poker face from himself, or maybe that is what he genuinely believed, that he didn't believe he could win the tournament. Even after beating Barney in the semi-finals, he said he still couldn't believe the tournament, and he was then in the final. So I suppose it's proved a lot to him that he can match it with the big boys, and hopefully he does get that call up to the Premier League next year. And it's great for darts as well, and great for the Premier League as well next year, going to Germany for the first time. He's easily the highest ranked German speaking player in the PDC right now, so for him not to be in that tournament and be there in Germany for the first night of Premier League action there would have been a shame. So great for darts, I think, and good to see someone who really really loved winning the tournament as well. His emotion after winning it was great to see, and it's good for the game as well to have these new players. I suppose he's been around for a little while now, but to win these tournaments, have new players winning it is good as well. Good to see the game in good health, I think.
Now, at the other end of the table at the Champions League was Dave Chisnell and Adrian Lewis, who both lost all 3 of their matches in the group stage, finished bottom of their respective groups. Should those two be worried after heading into the Grand Prix after going winless in Cardiff?
Definitely. I'd say Adrian Lewis more than Dave Chisnell. Just looking back at the stats from the weekend, Chisnell maybe was a bit unlucky with how he got on. Maybe did deserve to win with one game, 97, 95 and 98 averages. If you do that in your first 3 games in a TV tournament, then I suppose apart from the Grand Slam, you'd still be in because you have to win to stay through. But you would say he'd have a good tournament, but came away winless. And Adrian Lewis was particularly disappointing, especially after that first game against Phil Taylor when he was in such a good position and played well in that one, but just folded completely against Van Gerwen and Barney then on the Sunday. So he's got to look at his form now going into the rest of the year, and he's got to turn it around really, because he's not had the best years apart from the semi-finals of the World Match Play, which is the biggest tournament ranking-wise we've had so far. He's had a good run in that, but aside from that, we haven't really seen a lot from him, and he does need to start picking up some results sooner rather than later if he's going to make sure that he has a good World Championship and I suppose cement his place in the Premier League if he's not there already.
Yeah, and Adrian Lewis said after that first match against Barney that it felt good to be throwing well again, and then look at the next two matches where he was averaging in the 80s, which we've seen him do very frequently recently. We saw it multiple times in the Premier League. We saw it multiple times at the back end of last year. We've seen it when he's made European Tour appearances on the European Tour. He's just having way too many matches where he never gets to the races. And he finished with a minus 17 goal difference. We have to use our trademarked terminology. A minus 17 goal differential in his group stage. And that was over 3 matches. That means he was losing on average almost 10-4. And yes, these are the top 8 players in the world, but he is one of those top 8 players for now. He's in fact, number 5 in the world, just behind Phil Taylor for number 4. Will likely pass Taylor after the Grand Prix. But he's set to drop out of the top 16 at the end of the year, and there's nothing from those performances that indicate that he is still a top 16 player. He didn't even look like a top 24 player or top 32 player after that first match. He still is. He's still going to be in the top 32. There's no question about that, but he just didn't look like it on that weekend, and there's been too many times he hasn't looked like it recently. Chisnell, he's a little bit out of match form. We talked about he just won a Players' Championship less than 2 months ago. He had a good, for at least first match this past weekend. I don't think it's worry time yet for Chisnell. I think he just needs to get some more matches under his belt. But Lewis, yeah, he should be worried after that.
Moving on to this past weekend, and it was back to Euro Tour action and another title for Peter Wright in Riesa, winning the Happy Bet International Darts Open. Does this mean that he's getting back to top form, do you think?
If you would ask me that after Saturday, I would have said absolutely not, because that was okay. He didn't really have to do anything against Chris Quantock. Eventually, I'll be able to speak. But he did not. He looked bad in that match, and he didn't look much better against Ronnie Huybrechts, although there were flashes. But then, as the weekend got going, he just got better and better from match to match. He looked very good, especially for the second half of the match against Jelle Clausen. He was phenomenal against Ron Meulenkamp, who threw everything at him, and Peter Wright just threw everything right back. And then he was phenomenal again against Kim Huybrechts, who, for my money, had the best weekend of anyone in that field. His timing was spectacular. He just hit the right shot at the right time in every match, and it shows because he went against players with a higher average in pretty much every match except for his first match, and he won them all except for losing a last leg decider to Peter Wright. So his timing was phenomenal, and Peter Wright still was able to get over the line against him. That was what Peter Wright was doing a couple months ago. A few months ago. Look at that match against Benito van de Pas, where Benito was the far superior player, but Peter Wright knew how to get over the line and win that one. Well, he did that same thing against Kim Huybrechts, who was the player who was figuring out how to get over the line all weekend. I think that shows that Peter Wright is getting back. I don't know if he is where he was, and especially, not having Michael van Gerwen in the field probably gave him confidence that he might not have had otherwise, especially after missing all those darts for the match against Gary Anderson, which eliminated him from the Champions League. I don't think he's at the form he was in April, but I think he's on the way back towards it.
Yeah, Peter Wright himself said it in his post-match interview on stage after the final, saying that he's been struggling over the last 3 months, and none more so really than you mentioned there, that the Champions League, effectively what was a quarter-final against Gary Anderson and missing all those match starts. And I suppose we haven't really learned a lot about how Peter Wright's going to play against these top players going into the major events for the rest of the year. But for him, I suppose it's a welcome boost going into the Grand Prix this weekend, that he's got that title, and I suppose he's got that monkey off his back really. It's been a few months since he won his 9th title of the year. He's now got number 10, joins that elite group of players, Michael van Gerwen, Phil Taylor and John Park, to have won 10 or more titles in a season in the PDC. So he's joined that elite group of players. What he told us on the podcast was the legends of darts. So he's now a legend of darts. his first couple of performances over the weekend, probably you wouldn't be calling him a legend, but he turned it on for that final session, as you say, performed well against Yellow Clarkson at the end there, and then 200 averages in the last 2 games. So he turned it on when he needed to, and I suppose in some ways that is a mark of one of the top players, that they do sometimes, they're not able to produce their best starts, but they do just enough to get over the line and keep themselves in the tournament. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well you perform. It's the win that matters at the end of the day. And I suppose after those first 2 performances, all he would be thinking was, right, I haven't played well here, but I'm still in the tournament. I'm still in with a shout of winning it. And then he's gone on and found that level again. So I suppose good signs for him, really. But heading into the majors, we haven't really learned a lot about him if he's going to be playing the likes of Van Gerwen and Anderson in the latter stages. So we'll have to see how he gets on if he does indeed play those 2 over the last few rounds of the tournament.
Someone whose form has been the complete opposite this year, but had that great weekend, was, of course, the player he beat in the finals, Kim Huybrechts. Easily his best performance of the year. It's his first time even reaching the semifinals on the European Tour since a year ago, first time reaching the final since this event last year. Is he rounding back to the form he had last year and the last few years, which got him into the Premier League?
It certainly looks like it, and I'd agree with you that even though he didn't win the tournament, he had the best weekend, really. It's a great confidence booster for him that he's got to a final, and a player of his quality not to have made a final in exactly a year. This tournament, as you say, last year is a bit of a surprise, but I suppose away from darts, he's had some tough times that have been well documented during the Premier League. He had a tough Premier League campaign as well, and just coming off that, trying to find a bit of form again it's took him a little while. But as I say, this is a big boost for him going into the rest of the year, and this is come at the right time as well with the big events coming up, the Grand Prix, the World Championship at the end of the year. So there's some big events coming up, and to get to a final, to put in the performances he's done back to back to back to back, really, he's put in he's put in 5 great performances to get there. And one thing I did want to point out was the game after against Ian White. He won that 6-5. I believe that was in the 3rd round on the final day. And in his interview, he said that he'd been speaking to Ian in the back before, and Ian said, you're not the Kim of old. You need to get back to being the Kim of old, giving it the big one when you get a big score. And that is the Kim Huybrechts that we know, really. And when he's getting them big scores, he's playing well. He's full of confidence. And I think that's what we saw this weekend. He was back to the Kim of old. And if he's like that, then he is one of the top players, and he is a danger to win any of these big events. Yeah,
and as I said when we were talking about Peter Wright, the most impressive thing for me from him this weekend was his timing. You look at each match, he just kept hitting the right shot at the right time. He beat Joe Cullen, who had one of the great weekends, 6-2, and Cullen averaged 4 points more than him. Why did he win that match? Because he won 4 legs where Cullen either had a dart at double or was left on a double, and took out whatever he needed. And that's what you have to do. You have to take out the shot when your opponent gives you the chance. You've got to punish. You've got to hit when it hurts. And Kim Huybrechts was doing that all weekend. And it wasn't like he was going up against players who weren't playing well. He had Joe Cullen. He had Gerwyn Price, who played phenomenally this weekend. And he had Ian White, who also was in good form going in. As you mentioned, the interview, he said the same thing in his interview with us, not to forget that one. But I was very impressed with Kim Huybrechts' weekend. It was, okay, it doesn't look great on paper. At least, the averages aren't going to threaten the Premier League on paper. But the performances will. And those were performances of a player who seemed confident, seemed to know where his game was. And he said to us, and I'm sure he said in the stage interview, that his game, he hasn't been confident in his game. He hasn't been feeling it. Part of that, of course, has been all the struggles he's gone through this year. But that looked like a performance of a player who's going to contend or at least go deep into TV events. That was a very impressive weekend for him.
Let's give a mention to some other players that performed well over the weekend. Joe Cullen, Gerwyn Price, Simon Whitlock, Yellow Clarkson and Ron Meulenkamp. Who impressed you, though, the most out of those lot, or someone else that we haven't mentioned yet?
Dennis Nielsen. No, well, what a run by Nielsen. Overall, I'm going to have to say either Price or Meulenkamp. Both of them were great the entire weekend. Meulenkamp's match against Michael Smith aside, where even he said he was awful, and Michael Smith was probably even worse. But other than that, Meulenkamp had a great weekend, but so did Gerwyn Price. And okay, Gerwyn Price got knocked out earlier. He went out in the quarterfinals to Kim Huybrechts. But he played very well against Steve Lennon, who had one of the performances of the first round. He played nearly perfect against Mensur Suljovic. There was not much more Suljovic could do. And then he just ran into Kim Huybrechts, who punished every little thing Gerwyn gave him, and Gerwyn didn't give him much. That's the best I can ever recall seeing Gerwyn Price play on a stage. Better than even his runs to the TV finals in the UK Open and the World Cup. Better than any of his other performances on the European Tour. And okay, it came to an end in the quarterfinal, but that's a performance of a player who is worthy of consideration for Premier League, and I couldn't have said that before this past weekend. Now, he still has to duplicate it, and he still has to do it on television where he hasn't done it. Yes, he made the final of the UK Open, but it was a Scarsfield where he got some beneficial draws. If he plays like that at the World Grand Prix, if he plays like that in a couple of the TV tournaments coming up, that's a Premier League performance, and there weren't many players in this field who you can say that about.
Yep, I've got to agree. Price and Meulenkamp, for me, the first, I think, time he's got to a semi-final on the European Tour from Meulenkamp, and some great performances along the way, and to average 105 and lose 6-3 to Peter Wright in the semi-finals. He didn't disgrace himself in what was probably his biggest game that he's ever had in the PDC darts so far, so that's a big plus for him. But yeah, just echoing what you said about going Price as well, I'd put that win that he had against Mensur Suljovic as quite possibly in the top 3 wins that he's had in his darts career so far. To come up against Suljovic, crowd favourite, he's just won the Champions League, he's coming here to defend the title, and he's in the best form that he's ever been in, really, and confidence wise, and to beat him in a last league decider just shows you that Gerwyn Price is one of these players that's got a lot of potential, and he can really hit it with the big boys. And I suppose, yeah, he lost out to Kim Huybrechts in the next round, but for him that's a big boost for him going into the weekend and the Grand Prix as well. And I suppose he's been a bit derailed really over the last few months and 6 months by forgetting to enter events and that, but it looks like he's sorted that out, and it looks like now he's going to get into a bit of a rhythm. Now we've got tournaments coming up pretty much every weekend now. He's going to be involved in you'd say, most of them, if not all of them, so it's going to be an exciting time for him over the next few months to see if he can further enhance his chances of getting in the Premier League. And at the moment you'd say he's there or thereabouts, maybe 1 or 2 good runs over the next few months on TV, and he'll be there. So an important time really for him, and I'm sure he'll go into these events with that confidence from how he's performed this weekend.
Now at the other end, other than Andy Hamilton, who we talked about a month ago, so we don't need to talk about him again. He had just an awful performance in his first round match against Brendan Dolan. So other than him, though, anyone who disappointed you over the weekend?
Well, aside from Nandor Bezek, who was my pre-tournament tip to win the whole tournament, let's give a mention to Cristo Reyes, who is a player who's made some big strides this year, starting off from that great game against Michael van Gerwen at the World Championship at the end of last season. He's made some big strides this year, particularly on the European Tour, but this past weekend wasn't one of his best weekends. 82 average, 6-4 defeat to Ronnie Huybrechts, who himself has been claiming some big scalps on the European Tour stage this year, but I was a bit disappointed by him. But apart from that, there was a lot of players who really played well. Dennis Nielsen, a player that you touched on earlier, who's got to the quarterfinals on the European Tour debut. So yeah, not really anyone who disappointed me seeds wise, because they've all come up against players that have performed really well. Maybe you mentioned Michael Smith there as well. I'll put Michael Smith and Cristo Reyes as the seeds who probably disappointed me the most.
Yeah, Reyes just never got going, never looked comfortable or confident in that match. You can throw in Rob Cross as well, and okay, Josh Payne played well to beat him, but the first 3 legs of that match, Rob Cross looked like he was throwing with someone else's arm. Then he gets into the lead, takes out a 170, and he goes back to how he was playing the first 3 legs and just disappeared. You take those 4 legs out in the middle, he was averaging in the mid to low 80s. That's not Rob Cross. It was just a very funky performance from him, and he's going to be in the top 8 seeds at the next European Tour event, and he's tops of the Pro Tour qualifiers for the Grand Prix. Well, he didn't look like it in that performance. But, that's a minor thing. You mentioned Michael Smith as well. Just couldn't buy a double. There were some weird performances, but I wouldn't say anyone other than maybe Reyes really was that disappointing because everyone played well against them.
Now we'll come to our guest for this week's show, and it was 10 years ago, the anniversary of James Wade winning this tournament, the World Grand Prix this weekend. He's a 2-time winner, and he's our guest on the podcast this week. Hi James, thank you for joining us on the podcast this week. It's a big weekend coming up in terms of Pro Tour action and the Grand Prix after that. How are you feeling about your game at the moment heading into the Pro Tour and the Grand Prix?
Yeah, a bit different actually because I've had a month off. I've done nothing in the world of darts, so I've had a nice holiday. The longest time I've had out of darts probably in about 12 years.
Was that something you had planned to do, have that break after the World Series or not?
Yeah. I've just got to the point where I've been on and off where I've needed a break. I definitely needed a break. I needed some time away, and that's what I've done.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's come at the right time now, considering we've got all these big events coming up now for the rest of the year. So do you feel fresh going into the last few months of the season?
Yeah, obviously, I feel fresh, but probably going to be a little bit rusty. But a break was needed. Too much darts can send me absolutely mad.
But coming up this weekend, obviously, it's the start of the Grand Prix tournament, which I'm sure for you holds some great memories, winning it twice, hitting the 9 dart. What are your favourite memories from playing in the tournament?
I've got so many fond memories of it. I preferred it when it was in the smaller hall. Mm-hmm. It was more, personal. I've had some great games over the years there. There's been so many memories of it. I think one of my favourite memories actually was probably the first year I won it, because I won the tournament easy. I don't think anyone even come close to me. So that as a whole, I think that is one big memory.
Mm-hmm. And this year marks the 10th anniversary of that first win in the World Grand Prix. A couple of months before that, you won the World Match Play, and you're still up there in the game at the moment. What do you think? Do you put your longevity in the game down to?
Longevity, I think it's because I'm stubborn and like punishment. No, I mean it's no secret my form has dropped a little bit, but that's what happens when you're tired, and you need a break. And I've needed a break for probably 2 years. Now I've had a break. I haven't been a prolific practicing while I've been off. In fact, I've done very little. But now I've got to get back into the game, and I've got to get on the board and put the work in. Now I've got no excuses not to throw because I've had a break, which is what I've been moaning about to my wife for about 2 years. She arranged everything so I could have a month off, and I need to get the hunger back, and I'm missing it now. I've just started to miss the game, First 2 weeks it was like great, no darts. Third week, great, no darts. Fourth week I'm starting to think I'm starting to feel a little bit left out now. I want to throw some darts, so it's good.
Did you feel left out then when we've just had the Champions League of Darts, which is the top 8, and after the match play you dropped out of the top 8? Was that something you watched and thought, I want to be back in there now playing in them big events as well?
I didn't feel left out because I wasn't good enough to be in it. I wasn't worthy of it. You can't moan about something you're not worthy to be in. If I had been in the top 8 and I wasn't in it, then I would have felt left out and a bit upset with it. But I wasn't in the top 8, so rules are rules, and that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. How much are you hoping to get back into that top 8 during the rest of the year? And has your plans changed in terms of schedule-wise? Are you going to try and play in more events so you get back up the rankings again?
In my opinion, the top 8 isn't a hard bit of getting into. It's the top 4. Mm-hmm. As long as my head's there and I want to be there, the top 8's a normal every day at work. And I should be in the top 8. It's only because I've been lazy and, I've literally got to the point where I wanted not to be there. And I think everyone gets to that point, but like I said, I've had a break now. And now it's time to get back to work and get myself back in that top. I looked at, it's such a close range there. You've only got to win a tournament or runner up of a TV tournament, and you jump 4 or 5 places. So I know I can still do it. I know I can do it. I'm not one of the players that says, "Oh, I can do it," doesn't believe I can do it. You know, I know I can do it, and it's been long overdue. Mm-hmm. So that's what I need to do.
Mm-hmm. And with the Grand Prix coming up this weekend, I suppose it's one of the unique big events where we've got the two Players' Championship events before then. And I suppose all the players, including yourself, are looking at them two going, all right, they're not the big events coming up, but if I can have a couple of good runs this weekend, will that put you in good stead going into the Grand Prix, do you think?
I'll be honest with you, the weekend's just got, I'm going to use it as a warm-up. You know, if I don't play well or I lose first round, you know, it's literally just to get my arm going. I expect more than that. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen because, you know, I'm a different person on TV. So what will be, will be.
Mm-hmm. And in the Grand Prix, Steve West in the first round, a player who made his debut last year knocking out Phil Taylor. What are you expecting from him when you two go head-to-head on Monday?
I'm sure he'll be good. He'll be keen. I'm sure he's thrown more darts than me. But, you know, if I turn up, I'll win. If I don't, I won't. It's the same with any game of darts now, you know. If you play well, you win. If you don't, you lose. It's as simple as that. There's no in between. You know, it used to be where I can coast through that, you know, in the third gear, you know, and I'll get my pokes, and when I do take them, I'll win. But you know, you can't do that anymore. You've got to win a game.
Just looking back at your career so far, I mentioned those wins in the Grand Prix, the match play. Also got to mention UK Open Premier League. But which one for you out of them major wins, I suppose, that you've had gives you the most satisfaction when you look back on with the most fondness?
Probably it will be World Match Play. It will be my first tournament I won. So yeah. You know, the Premier League was nice. It was a long time ago. I mean, and people forget the averages, you know, that I was hitting. You know, that was how many years ago. The amount of 100 averages I hit was quite a few. So, you know, got to move onwards though. You know, you can't keep talking about the past.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I think a lot of players tend to do that. You know, that's the past. It's gone. That doesn't pay your mortgage and doesn't pay your bills.
And I suppose the big one really missing from that CV of yours is the World Championship. Do you feel any pressure when you go to Ali Pali thinking, I know a lot of players think that you're the most successful player not to have won a world title. How do you feel about it when you go to Ali Pali every year now?
I used to feel pressure there. I don't feel it anymore. I still get nervous, but I used to get over nervous for it, you know. Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't faze me, you know. I should have won it by now, you know, third most successful player. I've won more TV tournaments than anyone else, bar two people. So I should have done it, but I haven't. So ifs, could, shoulds, maybes.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like this year could be your year?
It could be. I'll know nearer the time, you know.
Yeah.
I know nearer the time where the darts are going. And I'll know on my first game. Mm-hmm. I know on my first game. Everyone knows on their first game if it's realistically achievable, and only then can you tell. I mean, you can practice as much as you want, you can throw as much as you want, you can play as well as you can. How you perform in that first game is the stall you set out.
And one player who won't be standing in your way at Ali Pali after this year, that's Phil Taylor, a player that you've had many great battles with over the last decade. What will be your overriding memories of being with Phil and playing against him?
I'm kind of gutted that some of the top players now never played him when he was at his best. Because if he was still there, he would still be the best. Definitely. You know, his finishing abilities were amazing. You know, 147s, 146s, 161s, you know. And if he still did that, he would still be the best player in the world.
Do you have any funny stories you can maybe tell us about being on the road with Phil that we might be able to broadcast?
I haven't got any funny stories about Phil, to be honest with you, because he was always the true professional. You know, he kept himself away. You know, He did his own thing, didn't mix too much. You know, he was the true professional in every way, shape, and form. It's only just now he started to socialise and, you know, have a laugh and stuff. He always had a laugh, but, you know, now he's, you know, come out of his shell a little bit and relax in front of the lads.
Mm-hmm. And if you had to pick one game that you've had with him over the years, what one would you say has been your most favourite?
Premier League final.
Yeah.
10-8 and he hit 2 9 darters.
Yeah.
I believe if he didn't hit those, he would have lost. How about that?
Absolutely. Can't ask much more than that, can you?
No.
And finally, we saw your wife, Sammy, post on Twitter a couple of days ago that she had a 144 checkout. A few people asking on social media, can you confirm that that's true?
It is true. It was against me.
Oh, was it?
Devastated. Should have stopped going on about that.
Well, James, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, and all the best for the weekend and the Grand Prix as well.
Thank you very much. Cheers, mate. Thank you very much.
Big thanks to James for joining us on the podcast this week. Now, before we go into our preview for the World Grand Prix, which kicks off this weekend, just want to say we'll be looking back at the World Masters, which, as we're recording this, is midway through. Looking back at that and all the BDO events over the weekend in next week's show, so stay tuned for that. But moving on to the Grand Prix, double in, double out format. It's a unique format to the PDC calendar. Some big first round ties there. I'm just looking at it now, but which ones for you stand out?
It's actually a lot of really good matchups this time around, and there's a lot that I'm looking forward to. I think, even though it's of course a blind draw, I think they did a fairly good job getting a lot of even matches, but I'll pick one from each side. On the top half of the bracket, I'm going to go Raymond van Barneveld against Kyle Anderson. I mean, what's not to like about Kyle Anderson's performances recently? He had a string of 5 or 6 consecutive matches on the European Tour where he averaged over 100. He won the Auckland Darts Masters and acquitted himself well, even though he went out early in the other 2 World Series events. He's been playing really well as of late, been looking like a top 16, if not higher, player. Got that TV title, of course, that we mentioned. And Barney, I mean, just made the semifinals of the Champions League, played well as well, especially in the last of the World Series events. And they're 2 players who are among the best in the game when they're on their game, and it could be an absolute belter. On the other half, I'm going to go Mensur Suljovic against Ian White. Ian White is, as Christopher Kemp has posted recently, at least entering last week, had the best doubling percentage of anyone in the PDC this year, and Mensur Suljovic is known for his finishing. So this is a match where both players could be getting in right away, and it's a format that suits both of those players. These are players that if the draw was differently, you would not be surprised if they made it very far. Well, one of them is going to have to go out in the first round of a tournament that suits both of them.
Yep, I've got to agree, as you mentioned there earlier, about the draw for this. I know now that we don't have the two Irish qualifiers in the event, it's now virtually the same criteria than what we had for the World Match Play. But in my opinion, I think we've got a better draw this time around than we have for the World Match Play. I'd say there's probably about 11 or 12 games there that really could go either way, and which I'm looking forward to. I'll do what you did and pick one from each side of the draw. Maybe not an obvious one, but I'd say 2 players that have shown some great form this year. Joe Cullen against Darren Webster. Joe Cullen at the weekend, 113 average in one of his games. Darren Webster, a great run at Blackpool in the World Match Play. So these are 2 players coming into this. Both will fancy their chances of getting through and getting through to that second round. And I think that one could potentially go all the way and go to a third set. And then looking at the bottom half of the draw, I'll say Gary Anderson and Richard North. A lot of people will expect that to go one way, a 2-0 win for Gary Anderson, but maybe I'm putting a bit too much pressure on Richard North, who, behind Rob Cross, has been the standout player from the new tour card holders this year. He's done brilliantly well to qualify for this, which will be his TV debut in PDC events. So if he can show some of the form that he's shown on the floor this year, then we could see an upset there. You never know.
Yeah, and just to mention again about Cullen and Webster, of course, those 2 players won the last of the Pro Tour events of the weekend before the World Match Play. Be impressive if they win the 2 this upcoming weekend in Dublin as well. Now, of the 8 seeded players, because it's only the top 8 that are seeded to the World Grand Prix, how many do you see falling in the first round, and which ones?
I could see maybe 4 or 5 seeds going. It's going to be close to call. Obviously, we all expect Michael Van Gerwen will get past John Henderson, but Barney, as you mentioned there, he's got a tough game against Kyle Anderson. Dave Chisnell against Jelle Klaassen, that one could go either way. And Adrian Lewis, who we've talked about earlier, is not in the best of form, and he's coming up against you'd say probably the hardest player out of the Pro Tour qualifiers at the moment, Gerwyn, who's probably the most improved player on the circuit this year. So you could easily see 3 of those 4 seeds from the top half go, and then bottom half. I know I've bigged it up that game, but many people expect Gary Anderson to get past Richard North. But then you look at the other 3 games for the seeds. Michael Smith coming up against Gerwyn Price, just based on the past weekend on the European Tour. You'd say Price goes into that as a slight favourite. Mensur Suljovic, Ian White. As Suljovic sort of peaked for the rest of the year, we don't know. Can he keep that form up going into this tournament? It's a tournament that Ian White, as you mentioned, our good friend Christopher Kemp, one of our statisticians, mentioned that Ian White's got the best doubling percentage, and surely that makes this the perfect tournament for him. And then at the bottom there, Peter Wright against Stephen Bunting. Again, this isn't Peter Wright's most favourite tournament. I don't even think he's got past the last 16 before. And Stephen Bunting, a player who's beaten him on TV before. Not sure how his form is at the moment. We haven't seen him for a little while, but if he's coming back into anywhere near some form, I know he won the Target Pro-Am, which gives us a good indication going into this. So maybe he could be another player to cause an upset. So I could see at least 4, 5, possibly 6 seeds going out in the first round.
Yeah, I have to echo that. I mean, it's not inconceivable that all the seeds in the bottom half of the draw go out. It's also not inconceivable that all 4 win. Other than maybe Gerwyn Price against Michael Smith, you've got to expect they'll all be the favorite. And even that, I think Michael Smith will probably be the favorite. In the top half, I haven't seen the odds, but I would guess Gurney's the favorite and maybe Kyle Anderson. But the only seed that you would think is safe is Michael van Gerwen. He's always done well against John Henderson. This is a format that, okay, it's a short format in the first round, but if you're asking Michael van Gerwen to hit 2 doubles in every leg, he's the most likely person to hit 1 in any leg. He's also one of the most likely to hit 2. This is just a tournament that is designed for him because of how good he is at every facet of his game. I can't see him losing, but I could see the other 7. I don't think they all will. I think Lewis will lose to Gurney. I'm going to tip Anderson to beat Van Barneveld and call it a reverse jinx, but I'm going to pick Ian White to upset Mensur Suljovic. Those are the 3 I think are going to happen, but I agree with you. I could see almost all of them happening.
Other than Rob Cross and Daryl Gurney, any unseeded players in there who you think could go far in Dublin?
Well, you talked about 2 of them already, Joe Cullen and Darren Webster. Now, the winner of that match is going to have to go against either Adrian Lewis or Daryl Gurney in the second round, but they both can do it. And if you look at Joe Cullen's performances last weekend, I mean, we undersold him just a bit because when we were talking about who was the most impressive. Well, he had a 113 average in one match. It wasn't much worse the rest. Came within a millimeter of being the first player in 4 years to hit a 9-darter on the European Tour. Granted, that was in a match that he got otherwise completely beat up in. But Joe Cullen's been playing really well as of late, but so has Darren Webster, especially at times. And they're the types of players who, in Darren Webster's case, takes well to the TV, and Joe Cullen's case is just, well, there's not much more to say than he's been finding an A game that we didn't know he had. I think the winner of that match will give either Lewis or Gurney real trouble in the second round, and then beyond that, they have every chance to win the quarterfinals against either Chizzy, Clausen, Thornton, or Kim Huybrechts.
Well, not just because he's been a guest on our podcast this week, but I'm going to give a mention to James Wade, a 2-time winner of this event, a runner-up as well. He's hit a 9-darter on the World Grand Prix double-in, double-out format. I know the last couple of years he's gone out in the first round, and he has got a tricky first-round game against Steve West, who, remember last year, beat Phil Taylor in the first round on his debut. But I think if James can get past that first game, Mensur Suljovic or Ian White, he'll fancy his chances best of 5 sets in that one. So I could see James Wade having a decent run in Dublin.
Now, finally, we've talked about some of the first-round matches and some of the other players that we think might have runs, but let's go all the way to the final. Who do you see getting to the final on the 7th of October, and then, more importantly, who lifts the title?
Well, I'll be very surprised if it isn't John Henderson against Richard North, and it's going to offer some great odds. But serious head-on, you've got to put Van Gerwen in that half of the draw, especially. I think it's a lot more weighted down in the bottom half for me. So I'd say Van Gerwen probably to get through the top half. Bottom half is a little bit more interesting. Gary Anderson, I think last year was the first time he got to the final of the World Grand Prix, so historically speaking, it's not a tournament that he always ends up in the latter stages of, and that could be the same this year. Gerwyn Price, Michael Smith, one of those two players, if they have a good run, could end up getting all the way. James Wade as well, a player I've mentioned there. So I think the bottom half is particularly stacked, and I don't want to say Gary Anderson will get there. Peter Wright's had a tricky time of it in Dublin, but I'm going to say Mensur Suljovic gets to the final. Actually, I'm thinking him to have another decent run and play Van Gerwen in the final.
And who do you have winning it?
It's got to be Van Gerwen. Unfortunately for Mensur, I think he'll just prove a bit too much. But I think best of 9 sets. I think 5-2 to Van Gerwen.
Well, I've already tipped my hand that I'm going to disagree with your final since I've picked Ian White to upset Mensur, although I hope I'm wrong since I am wearing a Mensur shirt right now as we record. But as far as top half, I'm going to agree with you. And I think there are players who can beat Van Gerwen on the way to the final. I definitely think the winner of Van Barneveld against Kyle Anderson, or even Rob Cross, who's in that same quarter, could upset them. And someone could get hot. Daryl Gurney, if he finds that form he was having the last few months, he can give Michael Van Gerwen a lot of trouble. Granted, best out of 7 sets is a different story. But there's just no one in the top half that you really think, especially in this format, is going to really give Michael Van Gerwen that many fits. If they play well, yes, but they're going to have to play out of their skin. Bottom half's really wide open. I don't want to say it's the top 2 seeds, but it's hard not to pick that. I think Gary Anderson's just going to get out of the bottom half. I think Gary Anderson's, he's playing well. He's not playing great, but he's playing well right now. But when he wants to, he's playing even better. And I think this is a tournament that he wants to make a statement at, especially after he, in many ways, gave away the final against Mensur Suljovic in the Champions League. That was his title to win, and all credit to Mensur, but Gary should have been able to play better than that, and he didn't. I think he's going to want to make amends for that. I think he wants to get there. I think he wants to put out Michael Van Gerwen. Is he going to? I'm going to say no. I think it's going to be pretty much like it was last year in the final. I think it's going to be the rematch, and I think it's going to be a pretty similar scoreline, so I'm going to go MVG around 5-2. Anything else for this week?
Just what you've said there, interesting to note as well that of the 32 players playing in the Grand Prix, Gary Anderson's the only one not playing in the two Players' Championship events, which are being played the 2 days just before the World Grand Prix. But also, we've got to give a mention to Robert Thornton as well. How good would it be to see him go on a good run? He's got into the field after Phil Taylor's pulled out. And what odds on him getting to a semi-final with Van Gerwen in a repeat, I suppose, of that final 2 years ago and knocking out Van Gerwen? Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, he has a draw that it can happen, but he, going against Kim Huybrechts after that past weekend, I wouldn't want to play Kim Huybrechts early right now. But yeah, and he needs it because that ranking money is about to fall off. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. We'll be back next week, as we said, with a recap of the World Masters as well as the events in the BDO in the final weekend before the cutoff, I believe, for both Lakeside and the Grand Slam. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the weekend of Players' Championship events as well. And if depending on when we record it, maybe the first round of the World Grand Prix. But that's it for this week. For Alex Moss, I am Burton DeWitt. Thanking you for listening, and we will see you guys next week.